Welcome to the Biotech Startups Podcast by Exceeda. Join us as we speak with first-time founders, serial entrepreneurs, and experienced investors about the challenges and triumphs of running a biotech startup, from pre-seed to IPO, with your host, John Chi. In our last episode, Rabia Khan reflected on her PhD experience, what she learned from juggling lab work and an MBA, and how a cold email led to her first job in tech. If you missed it, be sure to listen to part 2. In part 3, Rabia dives into her time at BenevolentAI and Sensyne Health, where she worked at the intersection of biology, machine learning, and clinical data, and began to see the limitations of traditional drug discovery firsthand. She shares how those experiences shaped her views on platform versus program development, and what it takes to align scientists and engineers around shared goals, and how curiosity and culture drive real innovation.
So many directions I want to go. I think the first point that really stood out to me is having a shared language amongst different, people who come from different walks of life and different disciplines. Because I think that is especially as organizations get bigger, sometimes that language never gets established and you're just talking past each other, or you don't talk at all.
Yes.
And that just leads to dysfunction. The goal in any organization is to row in synchronized fashion in one direction. But what ends up happening, and to use the vector analogy again, you're like two vectors going in the different direction, and then you're just barely moving. You're just kind of treading water almost, because you just you're not really, the second that you line it up, it goes crazy. And I think that's where I've found effective communication is so important, and having that shared language and just understanding, because that's where magic happens. Because then you're not the machine is just far more efficient. It's just way more efficient.
Well, you're solving the same problem as opposed to two completely different problems, right?
Yep.
But it's actually very difficult to do. In the world today, we talk about platform versus programs, and there's all of this, conversation about this space. And what I've learned there is that if you differentiate platform from programs teams, you create tension. And in fact, there should be no difference. Moving a program forward needs to feed the platform.
Yep.
And you need to run them in parallel, in unison, as opposed to, I've built this platform and now I have this program. And so one of the things we have at Cerna is that moving a program forward has to use the platform and it has to feed the platform, right? It has to be a concerted effort, because otherwise you have a platform team that's off going in this direction. And sometimes you have a programs team that's going in this direction. I remember at BenevolentAI, we had the world's best NLP. It was really great. They could read articles. But I really wanted someone to do RNA-seq data analysis. My problem set was different. It was not NLP. And so I was like, this is really exciting NLP, but
what about this?
I need you to do the gene set enrichment analysis for me.
Yeah. What about this? Then that's it's. I love that you bring this up, because it's I was having a conversation with Kate Yen at Oron Therapeutics, and she said something very similar about the platform feeding the program and vice versa. Yeah. It's kind of that you create the virtuous cycle.
You have to.
And that's where magic really happens. And I think, I don't know where the what caused, or not to point fingers necessarily at who insisted on it being so bifurcated. I think, because I interface with a lot of the capital markets and investor folks a lot, I think it's just easier for them to conceptualize oh, this is a platform play. This is a program play. But I'm guys, they don't have to be in opposition. They can be in sync. They can be in sync. It's just, it's kind of how this is going to kind of go in a detour a little bit, but it's kind of a lot of companies that are publicly traded are conglomerates. Some conglomerates are a mess. They're it's kind of that 30 Rock kind of thing where Like we have a television, like we have a television group, and then we also do washing machines. Okay, I get that is not necessarily a virtuous cycle, or at least one that clearly connects. But you can imagine like when organizations like do have they do a bunch of different things, the investor community is like too complex. You get discounted because it's too complex. You guys are doing different things, but like in actuality, like they're pretty similar and actually can feed off each other. And so I think sometimes, and this is me, maybe I am pointing a finger, like capital folks are like, I want to know exactly what I'm investing in, what the investment profile is, what the business model is, and to have it be super specialized, super focused, and it's easy for me to understand. But I think you can have them be copacetic, like, and it can be both.
I actually in another life I want to go work in PE. I think PE is the most exciting place on the planet because they are very clear about what they want to do in life. They want to make money, right? And there's no gray areas. Yeah. And I love that, right? And as someone managing capital markets, beautiful, right? The economist in me. I love that someone wants you to be clear and say, how are you going to make money? Because that's going to force a level of clarity. But I think why the platform program dichotomy started to exist significantly in tech bio was because the humans that were building machine learning platforms were technologically different from the people that were doing drug discovery, right? So Boston has been doing platforms forever.
Yep.
Right? Platforms are not new. Single asset companies, fine, but platform companies becoming biotech companies is the norm. Genentech, Regeneron, these were platforms that became organizations and commercialized drugs. But where machine learning is different is the humans, machine learning engineers, right? Different educational training from biologists. And so now they build a thing and a different human has to use the thing. And this human might not like the thing that you've built. And I have been in places where the machine learning engineers think the biologists are stupid and the biologists think that the machine learning people don't understand their problem set, right?
Yep.
And so then I think it is on senior management to produce a culture and an incentive structure that forces these two people to align to succeed. And that's where I think this dichotomy comes in, because there was a generation of machine learning companies that said, we're going to solve all of drug discovery with machine learning. And A, I don't think that's going to happen, but B, that's where, we are a giant platform that's solving all programs actually is not helpful, because our industry monetizes on assets. Our products are drugs. And it doesn't matter how beautiful this platform is, but if it does not, within an investment life cycle of about, I'd say 7 years, produce an exitable product, it is useless, actually. The value of something is what someone's willing to pay for it. And so the thing someone's willing to pay for is a drug. You better find a way to produce a drug. Otherwise, you've got a really nice research project and it needs to sit in academia.
Absolutely. And I think the way you describe it is, I think there's like different phenotypes. They're just like, yes, they're just straight up different phenotypes. Like, but they need to work together. But they need to work together ultimately.
And it's hard. It's hard, right? Because you've got to learn a different language. You've got to learn agile. You've got to run tickets. You have to document decisions. The amount of time I spent in the company being like, when a biologist makes a decision, I have to understand how you're making it, because I want to then see if we can automate it. That's a repetitive process. You have to keep at it. You have to keep working at it, because that's not how biologists are trained. We run an experiment, we do the analysis in Prism. No one goes looks at our Prism files, right? It's not GitHub. You're not doing code review. You're not pushing shit to Git. And so to me, all of this is, we have to change the culture. We have to change the culture of biology science to become more like engineering, to then bring these two disciplines to work together better.
Absolutely. And then the one other thing that stood out to me is like your questioning of the status quo is like, and the framing of the problem is like, I think critically important, because like sometimes you can just accept the status quo as like this is what is always going to be. But I think where the opportunity lies in that frame shift. And sometimes you have to be like an outsider, or at least the lack of experience tends to help a little bit.
Yes, it does.
Because like, not to say people with experience experience is great, like for sure. But there are also benefits to not having experience, because then you can ask these, people would call them like silly questions. Like the chemist is probably like, what do you mean? like look at all this. Like, of course, those are only 4,000. Of course. But I think that's where the opportunity lies, when you can come in with fresh eyes and maybe not have that baggage. And look, it's kind of that thing where we were talking about, like, when you see a problem and you just like pull it back and you pull it back and you pull it back. It could be wrong. It could be 4,000, right? It could be wrong. Your chemist could have been right. Like it is 4,000, but it's a worthwhile question and exploration to peel that thing back, because should the answer come back, oh no, there's a lot more druggable things than we anticipated, that's massive, massive value unlock and massive opportunity. Because I always think about it, like, if you're within the status quo, it is so crowded. Like, it is so crowded. Like 4,000 shared amongst so many people. You play different games, I think. This is getting to like the business side. It's like, it behooves you to try and play a different game. If there's like some like kind of like the foundational, like, like it's legit, like play the different game if you can. So anyways, I'm a big believer in that.
I just think it's always important to be curious, right? I love why is my favorite word. Why? Walk me through X, explain something. You'll always learn, but also more than that, it's incredible how much of that curiosity we lose with age.
Yep.
And, I think just trying to hang on to the curiosity, the naivety. People ask me, what caused you to start the company? I always say, like, there must be a certain amount of naivety, right?
Yep.
This seems like a reasonable problem. Why can't I go solve it?
Yep.
Because if you start layering the problems in and you start removing that curiosity, I think most people wouldn't do it.
Yep.
You have to be curious. You have to enjoy the problems, as opposed to view them as problems. You can view them as like puzzle pieces that you get to put together, which is a lot of fun.
Yep, absolutely. And I think that like for me, I felt that like if I knew exactly how hard it would, like on paper, starting a leasing company seems pretty straightforward. You get some money, you extend credit, like it's easy enough. And that's at least how I thought about it when I was first starting. And then I'm like, holy shit, like way more to it. But if I knew at like what I know now, I probably wouldn't have started. I would have been at the law firm. Like I probably would have been at the law firm.
100%, right? When I was thinking of starting this company, I actually was at BenevolentAI, and I was like, okay, I'm going to go start this. Something's bothering me. I'm going to try and solve this problem. 3 people took me for a walk around the block. Don't, Rabia. It's a terrible idea.
Yeah.
Quit your job. What are you doing?
Yeah.
Salary.
Yeah.
What I love about the US is, like, I have friends in the US. Abe at Adam Wise, he was one of my oldest friends, very good friend of mine. He was like, do it tomorrow.
Yeah.
Take the risk. Do it now. Move to San Francisco. Do it now. A couple of my other friends in the US, they were like, you must start this company. This is a great life decision. You'll learn a ton. But here in the UK, everyone was like, no, don't do that. Stable job. What are you doing? Are you
Interesting.
crazy? And so I did it. I did leave Benevolent, being like, try and figure out why we can't drug all of these targets. This makes no sense to me. But people really get you to question it. And I always think that earlier in life you take risks, the better. So in fact, I should have done this like right out of my PhD. as opposed to after a postdoc. And I always say, like, the earlier in life you take risk, the better. Learn earlier, make mistakes earlier, because the stakes are lower.
Spot on. It is so crazy that you bring that up. I was just talking about it last week because it's like, I have a friend. This is just like a personal experience. He has a mortgage and 3 kids.
Yeah. Not the time.
It's not the time. And I'm not saying it's impossible. It's just harder. Like, we're going back
you
to,
need a supportive,
right?
like, someone somewhere needs to catch the like, being a founder is your life. This is your baby, right? It is 24/7. There is no holiday. There is no downtime. It is going to consume your mind, even if you claim to be on holiday. I've done the thing where I'm like, I am taking a day off and I'm going to go for a walk. What do I think about on this walk? I think about work, right? And so it is going to consume every waking minute of your mind. And if you have a lot of other responsibilities, it's just harder.
Yeah. And it's like way harder. And like, people are relying on you for and again, I have seen those with families and responsibilities do it, but it takes a toll, right? We're working backwards again from, you got to sleep. That's a guaranteed, maybe 5 hours if you're lucky. Okay. That leaves 19 hours left. You have 3 kids, a mortgage, and a significant other, presumably. Okay. How many hours of 19 does that, if you want to be a present,
I really admire those people, right? Because the other thing, I remember there was a postdoc when I was doing my PhD. He had just had a baby. And so he would come in and he was the most ruthless, productive human because he had to be out at 4, right? And everyone has one of those in the lab. Yeah. They come in, they do like 10 times the amount of work because they got to get out at 4.
Yeah.
Whereas you, as your PhD student, you're like, well, I'll go for a coffee. I don't have to be anywhere. And so then everything gets dragged out, right? But I do think that it also allows you to take, like, if you start it in your 20s, you can have like 2 companies that you work on or 3 that you work on, right? And make mistakes earlier in life. Have wins, have failures earlier in life. And so I just think that was one of the main things of when I was starting this. Well, I left to start this company and then I got recruited into Sensyne Health. But when I left to start the company, the cultural difference really stood out to me. Whereas in the US, everyone was like, yes, aim big, dream. And here everyone was like, think about your mortgage.
Yeah. Yep. That sounds about right. It's kind of when I do reflect on the kind of the US kind of startup entrepreneurial ecosystem, I think that is something that I'm incredibly grateful for. And it's just like, and I don't take it for granted because like exactly what you described, like it's just not, it's a rare thing. It's a rare thing to be
it's like, rare.
Yeah, like go for it. Like go for it. Like when in every other place it's like, oh, that is career suicide. Like that's
the words. Those are the words, yes, that are used, right? You'll never get a job again.
Yeah.
People are going to think you're a failure. Like all of those words. And personally, I don't think they're helpful. I don't think they're ever helpful to say that to anyone.
Yeah.
Even if they are true, it is not helpful.
Yeah.
And
I think people are resilient, right? Like people are resilient. You're going to figure it out. Like it doesn't have to be like that scarlet letter type situation.
And like being supportive and positive, right? Whenever people come to me and say, I'm thinking of starting a company, and I'm like, just do it. Like the fact that you are thinking about it and saying it to another human means you've been thinking about it even longer and you're probably going to do it. And so just do it now.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you were at Benevolent, you were thinking about starting this company, but it sounds like you had first you went to Sensyne before.
So I left Benevolent and I went off and I was like, I'm going to try and figure out why we can't, target RNA or why we can't do this better. I think it had been a week and I got a call from Mike Burgoyne, who was the recruiter at BenevolentAI. And he said, because you left out of your own free will, I can do this. I recruit for another company in Oxford, and I think you should go there. And I was like, Oxford? I live in London. Like, no. And he's like, just go talk to him. So I get on the train, and then you get off the train, and you have to take a taxi, and it's quite far. And so I get there, and I meet Stephen Hamblin, and the company was called Sensyne Health. And he's just this most, and he's gone on to found his own company. He has a deck of cards, walked around with a deck of cards, shuffling cards. And he said, why'd you leave Benevolent? And I was like, well, I want to start my own company. And he looked at me and he said, you're going to go start a company. But in the meantime, I was wondering, I have this contract. And in this contract, we have to develop a genetic screening strategy for the patients in Oxford University Health. And I have a blank sheet of paper. And I don't know how to do that. So why don't you come here and do that for a while you think about your company? And I was like, actually, no to that.
Yeah.
And I then met the CEO of the company, whose name was Lord Paul Drayson. He's the ex-defense minister of the UK. And so at this one, maybe 3-hour, interview session, I met Stephen Hamblin, who was like, basically write your own job description.
Yeah.
And then Paul Drayson, who is, it's incredible to be in the presence of these people that have done really great things in life. And so I stood there and I was like, start my own company, build genetic strategy.
Yeah.
This one. And so I did go take the job at Sensyne Health. And within a month of joining, they needed someone to build out their machine learning team and real world evidence arm. So they had access to NHS patient data that was anonymized. And they had the most incredible business model. So Sensyne Health was listed, it was publicly listed, and the NHS trusts had equity in the entity. And any revenue that we generated using their data, we would give them royalties back. And so not only would their books improve in value from the value of the stocks, they would also get revenue if we use their information to do deals like virtual control arms and things like that using real world evidence. And so going from a world where I had understood protein-based drug discovery, machine learning, now all of a sudden I was in the world of real world evidence and running virtual control arms and using machine learning applied to clinical evidence, clinical real world data imaging. And I was given the opportunity to just build the entire machine learning team. So we did a deal with Bayer, $5 million deal, then a deal with Roche, a deal with BMS, a deal with Alexion. And I was single-handedly responsible for this. There was no one else.
Holy shit.
And they're like, girl. And so here I am, the biologist. I walked over to Stephen. I was like, Stephen, I'm building this team. He said, yeah, you'll be fine. And he just walked away. And I was like, okay. And he said something to me once, which was amazing. I said, why do you carry this deck of cards? He said, as a leader, your job is to hand over these cards as fast as you can to other people. And so I took the team 0 to 50 in 6 months, all PhDs in machine learning or doctors. We ran a number of pharma deals, understood, mapping real world evidence, building databases around it, building a technical team, alliance management, all of that. But more than anything, understood what clinical trials and post-market surveillance is all about, which is very different from this target is undruggable. Right now, you're at the other end of the spectrum and just so much fun. Phase 3 clinical trials, right? It's a very different beast, the challenges, the problems, and then working with patient data, working with real world evidence, very different problem set, right? Because you're dealing with classification systems, ICD-10 codes that make zero sense. And we classify diseases based on a billing system. I think most people don't realize this, that the reason you call something a certain thing is because you need to give it an attachment so it can be billed. But that's not how we do drug discovery. We don't do drug discovery in ICD-10 codes, but we definitely treat on ICD-10 codes. And I think the future exists in a world where we no longer classify disease as ICD-10 codes. I think that's where, if I could wave a magic wand, that's where I'd like to be, where we're classifying diseases the way we think about them biologically, not the way we need to bill for them.
Two different languages again.
Very different languages.
This very differently, and so downstream that, like, I think it's interesting as I hear your journey. It's like, you know how to do animal studies. You did it for a long time.
Injecting the mice, literally.
And then you're like, okay, I'm going to go acquire these in vitro skills. It's team in vitro now. And then now you're like, all right, team clinical, let's go. And also just going to build up a team of 50 and just become like a ML expert. I guess, like, how, as you're like, what, when you were acquiring these skills, is it like, were you tapping shoulders of people who like are experts in the field? Is it simply a brute force mechanism where you're like, time to get read, I'm just going to like read up on this as much as I can? Like, what is, or is it just like, I'm just going to figure this out and figure it out on the fly? Kind of like, how do you acquire these skills to do something like that, where it's like, there you go, the card has been dealt to you, just like, go do it?
Well, it's a public company. You've made promises to the analysts, and when my very first boss, Sam Molyneux, they called him for a reference. I think someone must have called him. I don't know. And he told me this later, which is that the thing about Rabia is if you have to just give her a problem and just go at it, like bull in a china shop. Right?
Yeah.
And Paul Drayson would do that. He would be like, oh, I have this problem. And he'd be like, Rabia, can you just go solve it? And I think some people are built like that. And I think that is their superpower. And if you're one of those people, hats off to you. Like, go find a really awesome mentor and go work for them, because everyone is always looking for one of those. And so I would none of these things is hard, right? So you want to hire a machine learning person. You have to know they're technically good. You have to establish a technical exam. We'll find someone to write that, find someone to evaluate it. You have to make sure they can do the thing you want to do and have a cultural fit. Done. That took me what? A minute? Okay. Now you take your network, you solve the first two, that's done. Okay, moving on. And then you figure out the cultural stuff. So, and then you build two people in the team. Now they have the technical knowledge. So you've dealt those cards out. Now you need to build the alliance management. Well, that's a bit easier, right? And so you just take it that way.
And I think that's maybe is kind of a thing where, if you think of, it's almost like, I always think about like chunking out the problem.
Yes.
It's like,
but that's what a PhD teaches you to do, right?
Chunk it out. Versus like, sometimes you can get paralysis where like, I'm going to try and solve all of this at once. And then you're like, oh God.
But I think a PhD teaches you to do that. But I think a task-oriented person operates in here's the list of things I need to do to get this done, right? I'm very task-oriented, and I'm very much like, I want to check the box. I want it to be done. And when the analysts at Sensyne Health had a revenue target, all I could think about was, where are we going to get this revenue from? And how do we pitch the company? How do we pitch the data sets? And so I was talking to the Bayer teams and the BMS and Roche teams. And so when check with signs, we needed people.
Yeah.
There was no one. There was me and four, I had inherited 4 direct reports. First time in my life ever line managing people. And we had promised 50, right? And I needed to go hire 50 machine learning engineers and people that understood real world evidence. And you just do it. Just, keep at it. It's amazing. One foot in front of the other, slowly keeping at it, what one can accomplish. It's so powerful.
And I think sometimes too, people like, as observers from the outside, like sometimes get the impression that the plane is already built. But what you've kind of described is like the plane is being built in real time. And like that's like a majority of companies. It's like the
Absolutely.
plane is like, I was just listening to like HubSpot's CEO on 20VC, and she like, HubSpot's a large organization,
Yes.
like,
Huge.
but they're also still building the plane. Like they are still building the plane. Like, and especially with everything that's going on in, SaaS and everything like that, they kind of have to. Like, it's kind of like the analysts are like holding their feet to the fire. They're like, you need, like, there are these goals that you need to hit, and these are the expectations.
And it's a different plane, right? That's what I think. I think you're always going to be building the plane. It's just, you built a rickety one-seater and now you're like, I'm in the air, but I'd really like to make this a two-seater. So I'm just gonna like push that over a little. And then at some point you're like, oh yes, I have oxygen. And like a third person jumps in, you're like, oh, there's no seat.
Let me just build this right real quick. That's exactly the feeling. And I think, because sometimes people, will just talking about on this entrepreneurial journey, they're always like, dang, it really looks like that, like how this well-oiled machine. And she's like, no, man, like, not like it's decently well-oiled, but like we have our our like friction and hiccups too. It's just like you kind of just have to go, like you said, one foot in front of the other and just keep going, and you keep going. And that's when compounding kind of like starts to pick up. Like, it's just like but you have to be consistent about it. And it's not just like just one thing.
One foot in front of the other. And it is always the little things.
Yeah.
Right. I think it's all about the little things. It's not about the big things. We had unique data sets and we had access to unique data sets. And that was true. We knew how to get it out. I had worked with this tiny little team of 4 people to develop case studies so we could sell. And because we had those case studies, people could see that we could do this. And therefore, they were willing to give us money. And everyone puts checks and balances into place, right? There's no free lunch. Like, you had to bill for people. Their CVs had to exist. There had to be joint steering committees. We had to perform. Everyone was performing at a level that was non-negotiable. Like, it was like clockwork, right? But I love that. I love that energy. I love that environment, the high pressure, all the stakes. I mean, I was managing 90% of the company's revenue. The majority of the company's revenue was coming from that deal or the deals that we had, right? And it's just so much fun.
Holy crap. It sounds like a true baptism of fire, but one that's like an incredible, like, just like, it sounds like you're drinking out of the fire hose in terms of like learned experiences there. Because like you're talking about clinical trials, you're talking about like working with some of the largest organizations in the world, which is a whole it's not the same as like working down market. It is like far different. That motion is different. And I can only imagine like how sharp like at this experience made you. Like, it started with this blank slate, and then you're just like, holy crap, you're just like, you've like accumulated just like so many tools in your tool belt now.
And it's amazing, right? So Stephen Hamlin, who had hired me, I joined in October. In November, they're like, you're now running this division. I was like, what? I think like 6 months later, he's like, I'm going to go start my own company. And I was like, you're leaving me?
Yeah, like, what?
You're leaving me here alone? Yeah. He was the CTO of the company. And so I was San's CTO, right? And so it was just a really interesting experience. But what it tells you is that people take bets on you in life. Like, they allowed me and gave me the space to do this. Like, it sounds like I went and did A, B, C, and D. Absolutely not. Paul Drayson was the CEO of the company. He gave me the space to go and be and build that team and free reign to hire recruiters and interview and hire and fire and put so much faith in someone who had never done it before. Right. So at this point, I'm running at 50% of the company, managing 4 of the largest clients in the organization, having never done this before. And that's a testament to Paul, who was the CEO, that saw someone and said, I'm going to let her do this because I'm watching, I'm keeping an eye on you, but it's okay. Like, grow with the company. Right. And I think there's some really great humans that do that. Not everyone does that. I really think we hire young at Cerna Bio, and we want to give people that room to grow. Like, I've got your back. Don't worry. Paul would always say, like, Rob, if there's a problem, I'm here. Like, come talk to me. But like, go do your thing. And you want, those are the organizations that allow you to grow so fast. Like, that level of growth is just personally so high.
Absolutely. I mean, it honestly reminds me of your undergraduate lab experience where you like, all right, here you go. Like boop, 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 right? And just like early on, just giving it early opportunities, I think is like, I think people, you'll be surprised at like, people will surprise you like with their ability to rise to the occasion. Like that is something I'm always, you know, we're likewise, we like giving the opportunities to folks who like it you know, experience is important for sure. But like on top of that, like there's something to be said about that hunger. Yeah. Like the hunger to learn and the willingness to learn, because like people are resilient, people are adaptable, people can learn hard shit. Like if you give them the opportunity to, that's the thing. Like you need to give them the opportunity. And on the flip of it, if someone doesn't have that, it is incredibly hard to make them rise to the occasion. I can't force someone to give a shit.
I've tried. I've tried and failed so many times.
I've tried too. It's hard.
There's so much opportunity. Why don't you take it? And people are just like, you know, I'm checking out 5 o'clock. And I was like, okay, well, this is not for you.
It's hard.
And so I think, you know, you can see it in some people. And when we find those people, I really hang on to them because I think they're going to go on and do great things no matter where they go. And so if you can be that first experience where you allow their career to go like this, they're going to remember that, right? And you're going to be that person that gave them that opportunity. So I think that's really powerful.
Absolutely. And something, this is an Exceeder thing, but or maybe just a me thing, but in addition to this kind of like exactly what you just described, something that we always look for is that, have you worked in the service industry, like hospitality or service? That's really, I mean, it's not the sole thing we look for, but we love when we see it, because talk about like having to deal with hard shit. It's like, if you worked at like Starbucks and have a upset person who didn't get their coffee on time yell at you at like 7 a.m, you can handle most things. Like you can handle most things in life if you're getting screamed at in public. Like,
fail,
you know, right?
As well, right? Like I always, like I think some of the best people have worked in sales. I've not worked in sales, but I'm talking like actual sales, like, you know, cold calling, that type of sales. I think it's a very powerful skill.
For sure.
Because the thick skin, right?
Yeah.
Like,
you're unfazed. You're just unfazed. Yeah. Because like, I feel the exact same way. And I think sometimes in science, you don't see it as much. Like you don't, you know, there's less of that in the kind of like healthcare or life science industry. You're like usually like lab folks.
I think the unfortunate thing is we give it a dirty, like,
there's a stigma around it.
Like, oh, you're in sales. I think it's like one of the most powerful skill sets to have. My father did sales before starting the company that he runs now. And I think it teaches you so much, right? The customer is always right. How do you engage, right? And so what, you know, having run those 4 pharma partnerships, one of the things that I always tell my team is like, if one of our clients says jump, you say how high.
Yep.
That's how that works, right?
Yep.
You do not show up and tell your client, well, I think you're running the experiment incorrectly. What you say is, thank you for this design. Here's our minor changes if you would like to consider them, but we're also happy to do exactly what you asked. Because I'm sure everyone's worked with one of those designers where like you give the designer some direction and they go off and they do their own thing and tell you why the design you want is wrong. And you're like, but I want you to do the thing here. Like I asked you for a black background. You might not like black backgrounds, but I do. Yeah. Can you just do the black background?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Exactly. And I think too, it's like sales is also just like super humbling. Mm-hmm. It's super humbling. And And that it's kind of like, I always think about it as like, it just like keeps you honest. It like frankly keeps you honest. Because like it's, you don't win them all. You just don't win them all. And the ability to take an L and get up and do it again, that is like
economics,
that resilience.
Right? Like something is only worth what someone is willing to pay for it. And sales is about convincing someone, narrative, storytelling. Like, let me make you want to part with something that is precious to you, whether that's money, time, whatever it might be. And I think it's such a powerful skill set, and it's underrated in our industry. I think in our industry, we don't put enough value on it because everyone's in BD or alliance management. No one's really in sales.
Yeah.
Unless you're a sales rep,
right? But it's actually sales. Like, I know you call it something different. Like, it's actually sales. But
if your metric is revenue, you're in sales.
Yeah. It's just like, and sales comes in a bunch of different flavors. And I think, for anyone out there, there's also a lot of internal selling that needs to happen too in any organization, even if you're small. Like, again, as a founder, you have to convince people to stick around. Like,
you have to convince people to stick around. You have to convince people to give you money. You have to convince customers. Like, I think it's very difficult to succeed even as an individual contributor, as a technologist, without being able to sell whatever it is that you do. I just think people underestimate the power of sales, and they overestimate the power of technological excellence.
Yep. I agree. I completely agree. And I was actually the conversation I was having with one of our previous guests, sales leader at Millipore, said the exact same thing. It's like, having a great product it's necessary, but it's not sufficient. Like,
table stakes.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. You got.
I was talking to someone about fundraising, and I was like, what do you need? And he said, look, Rabia, an excellent team, amazing data, a great pitch deck, and a narrative. That's normal.
Yep.
We're not even going to debate that. So you better have all of these things. Now we're talking about what you need. So like, this is just table stake. So like an excellent product, this is normal.
Yep. You got to. It's like the buy-in. It's like you want to play the game, you kind of have to have it.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Biotech Startups Podcast with Rabia Khan. In part 4, Rabia shares how she founded Cerner Bio, why she bet early on RNA targeting small molecules, and how she navigated fundraising while building a platform that challenges traditional drug discovery models. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe, leave a review, and share it with your friends. See you next time. The Biotech Startups Podcast is produced by Exceeder. Don't want to miss an episode? Search for the Biotech Startups Podcast wherever you get your podcasts and click subscribe. Exceeder provides research labs with equipment leases on founder-friendly terms to support paths to exceptional outcomes. To learn more, visit our website www.exceeder.com. On behalf of the team here at Exceeder, thanks for listening. The Biotech Startups Podcast provides general insights into the life science sector through the experiences of its guests. The use of information on this podcast or materials linked from the podcast is at the user's own risk. The views expressed by the participants are their own and are not the views of Exceeder or sponsors. No reference to any product, service, or company in the podcast is an endorsement by Exceeder or its guests.